As the 1990s drew to a close, first-person shooters were evolving, pushing the boundaries of storytelling mechanics and multiplayer experiences. In 2000, Rare, the studio behind the legendary GoldenEye 007, delivered a spiritual successor that set a new standard for the genre, Perfect Dark. Set in a futuristic world of espionage, conspiracy, and advanced technology, Perfect Dark followed Joanna Dark, an elite operative navigating a web of intrigue involving corporations, aliens, and shadowy agendas. With its cutting edge graphics, innovative weaponry, and robust multiplayer modes, Perfect Dark wasn't just a game, it was a leap forward for the whole genre, showcasing Rare's mastery of immersive gameplay and detailed world building. Today, we're diving into the Perfect Dark series, its groundbreaking features, and how it left its mark on gaming history. So grab your laptop gun, activate your cloaking device, and join us for today's stealthy trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 247th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are infiltrating the story of Perfect Dark, the 2000s sci-fi shooter that pushed the N64 to its limits. As the spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007, it introduced players to Joanna Dark and set a new standard for stealth action gameplay. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably alert every guard in the facility within minutes. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you handle stealth missions as stealth, or do you just try to outshoot everyone and hope for the best?
I don't know what stealth means, Dave.
I can't do stealth.
Sneak zero.
Ain't that the truth? I am so bad at stealth. I don't have the patience for stealthy games and stealthy style gameplay.
Yeah, no, I'm good on that. I mean, well, I'll try it, but I'm bad at it, so it ain't
I
never that
mean,
fun.
maybe some role playing games like Skyrim we've done it on. Yeah.
Not even really that.
You don't train your stealth so you can shoot people in the back with arrows and like murder them in one shot.
Not really, no.
Ugh. Well, that's about the only game I can tolerate stealth in any way, shape, or form. But otherwise, I got nothing. I don't like stealth. I don't care for stealth. We've talked about this before when we did games like Thief, for instance, which is completely stealth. I just don't I don't care for that. But that's okay because some people do. Some people like the thrill of sneaking around not getting caught, and that's okay. If that's what gets you up in the morning, good for you.
Yeah, good for you.
Good for you. All right, Rob. Well, we're going to cover Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark series, to be fair, because I'm going to talk about the games that came after Perfect Dark itself. Not a whole lot of them. And so a lot to talk about today. Before we get there, however, why don't you tell our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
All right, well, kicking it off on May 22nd, 1980, Pac-Man was released in Japan, marking a transformative moment in video game history. Developed by Namco and designed by Toru Iwatani, the game introduced players to a vibrant maze chase experience that diverged from the prevalent shooting games of its era. With its iconic yellow protagonist navigating mazes to consume pellets while evading colorful ghosts, Pac-Man captivated a broad audience, including women and families, thereby expanding the gaming demographic. The game's innovative design and universal appeal led to unprecedented success, with over 400,000 arcade units sold worldwide and an estimated $3.5 billion in revenue. solidifying its status as the highest grossing arcade game of all time. Pac Man not only became a cultural phenomenon, but also laid the groundwork for character driven games, influencing the industry's trajectory for decades to come. We covered it back in episode 14. Holy shit, that's a long time ago. So give it a listen if you'd like to learn more.
I thought about the same thing. And almost all right, I got to tell you that sometimes my memory of how we progress as a podcast is weird, right? Because if you know that when we started our podcast, for longtime listeners, you'll know this, but for newer people, we weren't a history podcast. We were a nostalgia podcast, like talk about our feels, and we were topical for the first one or two episodes, right?
Yeah,
We were scripted for the first two episodes, weren't we? Didn't we do
uh,
like skits? We did like commercial skits and stuff for a couple episodes.
we sure did, Dave.
So yes, we didn't come into this wanting to strictly be a history podcast. That was my thing. I felt like there was a ton of history podcasts and I wanted to be different. I wanted to be like, let's talk about how video games make us feel. And then as I got into video games, I like history. I have a history degree. We just got into the history. And I just leaned into that. That's my strength. That's much as obvious by now, right?
Eh,
Point is, I didn't realize how early we did it because we did a history episode. That Pac-Man episode is a history episode. You know, I know there were a couple early episodes where I was like, we did a Just Cause episode, where instead of talking more about Just Cause, we talked about Operation Just Cause, the like real military operation that inspired the game, right? But we hadn't yet leaned into history as a topic, like video game history. And then I look at some of those early episodes like Diablo or Pac-Man, which are straight up history episodes, and I kind of think to myself like, maybe I did have this early on. Like, I know I'm way better at it now. Let's not even argue about that. Episode 14, if we did a Pac-Man episode now, it'd probably be a lot more solid than that one. But the point is I think about that, and you're right. 14 was a long time ago, and it's crazy to see how the seeds were planted early on for what we are now 230 episodes later, you know?
absolutely, Dave.
All right, that's my pedestal. I'll step off it now. Floor is yours.
And with that, moving on May 22nd, 1998, Unreal was released for Microsoft Windows, marking a significant milestone in the evolution of first person shooters. Developed by Epic Mega Games and Digital Extremes, and published by GT Interactive, the game introduced players to the alien world of Nepali, where they assume the role of Prisoner 849, a survivor of a crashed prison ship navigating a planet overrun by hostile Scarge forces. Unreal was powered by the debut of the Unreal Engine, which showcased groundbreaking graphical adventures such as dynamic lighting, expansive outdoor environments, and detailed textures, setting new standards for visual fidelity in gaming. The game's immersive atmosphere, coupled with its innovative AI and level design, garnered critical acclaim and commercial success, selling over 1.5 million copies by 2002. Unreal not only spawned a successful franchise, including the popular Unreal Tournament series, but also established the Unreal Engine as a cornerstone technology in the gaming industry. We learned all about the game and the engine back in episode 38, so almost just as long ago, as Pac Man if you want to learn more. So yeah, go do that.
Yeah, go learn more. Early episodes, 14 and 38.
1438.
And 38 we were in the middle of. I mean, that's a history episode straight up. We were pretty much there.
Well, as your soapbox said, Dave, we started before 14, so there you go.
Sure, stand it.
Next up, on May 22nd, 2001, Red Faction was released for the PlayStation 2, introducing players to a revolutionary first person shooter experience. Developed by Volition and published by THQ, the game was set on Mars in the year 2075, where players assume the role of Parker, a miner who becomes the leader of a rebellion against the oppressive Ultor Corporation. Red Faction was notable for its geomod technology, which allowed for unprecedented environmental destruction, enabling players to alter the game world in real time. This innovation set a new standard for interactivity in shooters and contributed to the game's critical acclaim and commercial success. Red Faction laid the groundwork for the franchise that would continue to explore themes of rebellion and freedom in science fiction settings.
I wish they would bring Red Faction back. I really enjoy Red Faction. The environmental destruction was, at the time, revolutionary. I think there's a lot of room for a game like that again. That and Mercenaries. Remember Mercenaries?
I remember Mercenaries.
I loved Mercenaries. You could blow everything up. Ugh. I wish we could have those back.
Battlefront Hardlines.
There you
Battlefield
go.
Hardlines. That's what I meant. All right, with that, next up on May 19th, 2005, Brain Age Train Your Brain in Minutes a Day was released in Japan for the Nintendo DS, marking the debut of Nintendo's innovative edutainment series. Developed by Nintendo SPD and inspired by the research of Japanese neuroscientist Dr. Ryuta Kawashima, the game aimed to stimulate cognitive functions through daily exercises. Players engaged in activities such as arithmetic calculations, reading aloud, and the Stroop test, utilizing the DS's touchscreen and microphone to interact with the game. A unique feature was the Brain Age Check, which assessed the player's mental agility by estimating their brain age based on performance. The game also included Sudoku puzzles, adding to its appeal. Brain Age achieved significant commercial success, selling over 19 million copies worldwide, and played a pivotal role in expanding the gaming audience to include older demographics. Its success led to several sequels and solidified its place in gaming history as a pioneer in the brain training genre.
We all need that genre.
Yes, we do. And Brain Age was fun. I did the Sudoku is where I was always at.
A lot of us enjoyed Brain Age. For what you think wouldn't be an interesting game was an interesting game.
I just really like Sudoku, man. It was a lot of fun. Just sit there and play Sudoku all day. That was my shtick. Schmushspiel. Last up for this week in gaming history, on May 24th, 2016, Overwatch was released for the PS4, Xbox One, and PC, marking Blizzard Entertainment's entry into the team-based first-person shooter genre. Set in a vibrant near-future Earth, the game introduced players to a diverse cast of 21 heroes, each with unique abilities and roles, fostering strategic team play and dynamic combat scenarios. Overwatch distinguished itself with its emphasis on cooperation, colorful aesthetics, and accessible gameplay, appealing to both casual and competitive players. The game's launch was met with critical acclaim, earning numerous Game of the Year awards, and rapidly built a dedicated global community. Within its first week, Overwatch attracted over 7 million players, accumulating more than 119 million hours of gameplay. This solidified its status as a cultural phenomenon and a cornerstone in the evolution of multiplayer shooters. We actually celebrated its 5-year anniversary back in episode, another old one, 39, with some of our friends. So if you'd like to learn more about the game and its origins, go listen to us and our friends talk about Overwatch.
Oh, that was so long ago, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. We had 38 and then 39, and then
14.
we also kicked it back to 14.
We did. These
There's a
are
lot of
some.
oldies today, so go check it out if you want to learn more. But if you want to learn about today's topic, we'll let Dave take it away. So, Dave, have at it.
We've covered the developer of our topic today, Perfect Dark, before, which is Rare. Rare is.
It is rare for us to have done that.
It is rare for us to have done that, yes. Rare is a British video game developer that is now owned by Microsoft. We'll cover that in our story. It's part of today's story. But once upon a time, they were not owned by Microsoft or anyone for that matter. They were a little software development company that started back in 1985, literally 1985, so 40 years ago. Rare's been around for 40 years, and Rare's founders are a pair of brothers, Tim and Chris Stamper. They originally founded a company called Ultimate Play the Game. And Ultimate Play the Game basically was a company that made games for the ZX Spectrum home computer. They were incredibly popular. And essentially, what happened was that at one point they got their hands on a Nintendo Famicom. And they looked at the Famicom as the future, as most people did. Now, this was before the Nintendo. This was literally the Famicom. They saw the Famicom as being more sophisticated. It was cartridge based, so there was virtually no load times, that the computers suffered from. And it would have a worldwide market once the Famicom would become the NES. The ZX Spectrum was a PC that didn't have as much of a global appeal as the Famicom would end up being. So they took a chance. And, Nintendo was notorious for not working with other companies, but Rare took a chance. And they essentially founded Rare for the purpose of reverse engineering the Famicom to be able to learn how to program on it. And so they did that, right? And they basically they learned how to program on the Famicom. They made a bunch of tech demos, and they took those tech demos to Nintendo headquarters. They basically went to headquarters and said, "Look at what we've made," because nobody at Nintendo thought that their console could be reverse engineered. They said it can't be done, and Rare said, excuse me, let me show you."
Very true.
So they did. They reverse engineered a console, make tech demos, took them to Arakawa, one of the Nintendo executives in Japan, and it was a risk, right? Because on one hand, Nintendo could be like, "WTF, mate? Like, why you doing something you shouldn't be doing," which was reverse engineering. Instead, the way it went down was Arakawa was incredibly impressed with this team for being able to do that. It was clear that they had talent. Not only did they reverse engineer the console and learn how to program on it, but they programmed impressive tech demos. And so he basically said, "Okay, we're going to work with you. We're going to let you make games on the Famicom. We're going to give you whatever money you want to make games on the Famicom." So Famicom comes out and into the United States, the NES, and Rare is making games for it. One of their early games for the NES was a downhill skiing game called Slalom. They also, let's just say, they were very prolific NES developers. Over a 5-year period, they made over 60 games, 47 of which were for the NES. And the other, was it 13? Were basically ports of those games to either the Game Boy or the Sega Genesis.
Nice. That's good.
And there are some other games that they made that you're probably going to know. There's a racing game called RC Pro AM that we've talked about. There was a platforming game called Shake, Rattle, and Roll that's well known. They also made what's notoriously known as one of the hardest video games of all time, definitely of that era, in Battletoads. Classic game, very well
Indeed.
known.
Yes, it is.
They made a lot of licensed titles. They worked on Nightmare on Elm Street, Hollywood Squares. They ported over games like Marble Madness to the NES, Narc. Sid Meier's Pirates came over to the platform thanks to these guys. They were incredibly prolific developers in the 8-bit era. I mean, 60 games in 5 years is nothing to shy at. That's a game a month. It's a game a
Yeah,
month.
that's damn impressive.
So Rare, everybody knew Rare in the NES era. Legitimately, we all knew Rare. I mean, these games that we talked about, Battletoads, everyone knew Battletoads. There were video game shows where you could compete and playing video games on Nickelodeon. This is me from me as a kid in that area period that would play those games every day. Can you make it through the sewer portion? We'd see it on Nickelodeon every single day. So we knew Battletoads. I loved RC Pro AM. Like, Rare was everywhere. For whatever reason, when it came time to transition over to the Super Nintendo, Rare just they weren't ready. Like they didn't make the transition at the snap of a finger like a lot of others did. They continued working in the Battletoads franchise and decided to invest all the profits they had made into high quality, like commercial graphic workstations made by Silicon Graphics Incorporated, SGI. And basically, they took these SGI graphics machines to make 3D models and graphics, and they pre rendered them, and then they put them onto the cartridge of the Super Nintendo system. And this is how they created Donkey Kong Country. Now, we've done a whole episode on Donkey Kong Country. If you want to learn all about it, I was just going to check out that episode. It is a technological marvel for its time, and Rare did create it. It's the what third best-selling game in the SNES library, selling over 9 million copies. They made a couple sequels. They got their notoriety back with Donkey Kong Country because of this progress that they were making towards the Super Nintendo technologically, right? Because as one company pushes the limits on a system, everyone else wants to follow suit. Nintendo started to buy stock in Rare. In 1994, it was 25%. Eventually, it became 49%. So Nintendo all but owned the company, right?
Just waiting for that 1% to sell.
Just waiting for that 1% to sell. So they went through the SNES era with the Donkey Kongs, and then it came time to transition over to their next system, which was going to be the Nintendo 64. Their first title that they made for the N64 was a game called Blast Corps. Blast Corps was a game where you use a vehicle to destroy buildings in the path. Like, there's a runaway nuclear missile carrier, and you have to destroy buildings so it doesn't crash into them and blow everyone up.
All right.
It was a fun game. I loved Blast Corps. So,
It's an interesting concept. Hey, so this thing doesn't blow things up, you blow them up.
yeah, pretty much. Like you literally like the it's like an action puzzle game, right? And essentially you have like Tonka trucks, like literally like front loaders and stuff like that, to where you have to basically destroy all these buildings, farms and buildings and otherwise, so the nuclear runaway missile carrier doesn't crash into anything and blow up. So
Very
there's like
nice.
a dump truck, there's a bulldozer, there's a lightweight buggy that like can like fly through the air and hit things from above. There's a motorcycle that shoots missiles. And eventually you get like robot mechs that can like do a lot of damage by like flying, stomping, shooting type deal. They do everything. So it was a really fun game. I popped it up here, and according to this, it's the second highest rated N64 game of 1997.
Wow,
So
impressive.
people liked it too. People liked it too. After making Blast Corps, Rare looked forward to GoldenEye 007. Now we did a whole episode on GoldenEye. Rob, big fan of GoldenEye.
I was a
Yes,
fan.
yes, yes. GoldenEye, absolute best-selling game of the N64 era. One of the best-selling games for the platform. Period. Sold more than 8 million units. Fantastic game. They did a whole lot of great things on it. Go check that episode out. That essentially brings us to where we are today. With the success of GoldenEye, they had some wind underneath their sails. And then came the question that we find ourselves at with development studios over and over and over and over. And that is, what are we going to do next? And initially, it looked like the studio was going to make a sequel to GoldenEye because they were working at, GoldenEye as a movie. They were developing a sequel to that movie, a movie called Tomorrow Never Dies. and it looked like Rare was going to be asked to create that sequel. So the team kind of geared themselves up for continuing the work that they had been doing, but now Tomorrow Never Dies. But the license of it was still up in the air. They had only gotten the license to the original to GoldenEye 007, and in the end, they were outbid by Electronic Arts for said license. So Tomorrow Never Dies, which came out in 1999, was an Electronic Arts title, and if you ask me, not nearly as good as GoldenEye, but that's neither here nor there. And admittedly, that was fine because, as the team was concerned, they had just spent quite a bit of time in James Bond's universe, so to speak. They had James Bond fatigue based on all the time it took them to make GoldenEye, and they were ready to move on from Bond's universe. But they did enjoy making a first person shooter. They enjoyed making a spy thriller. They enjoyed building the engine. Like, there was a lot of things that they enjoyed about the process and the expertise and what they took away from it. So it was decided that they would take that groundwork and build upon it to create something even better. In a Gamasatra interview, Martin Hollis, who was the game's initial director, he said that a lot of the initial high-level decisions were made to try and be different from GoldenEye while reusing some of their expertise and the engine that they made in the process. So, Rob, what does different from GoldenEye look like? Now, before I get into that, let me ask, do you have any familiarity with Perfect Dark? No, this is a series you've never seen, watched anyone play, or anything like that?
I mean, I'm sure I've seen clips from it, but I've never like watched anyone play or sat through a playthrough or played it myself, so my knowledge is very limited.
Very, very limited. Very, very limited. For those of you who don't know, Perfect Dark is a first person shooter. It follows a protagonist named Joanna Dark, and she is a spy slash agent who basically attempts to stop an extraterrestrial conspiracy. And so GoldenEye is realistic, right? So to speak. It's an action film. Let's not mince words there. And the stunts in it are outlandish, but it's a realistically grounded international spy genre, right?
Yeah, close enough.
And Perfect Dark is not. So the international spy genre gave way to a science fiction setting at the insistence of the team. There were a lot of sci fi fans on it, and they basically said, hey, we would like to work in the sci fi genre. Let's have some fun in a genre that we enjoy and switch to sci fi. So, spy, now sci fi. James Bond was obviously replaced with Joanna Dark because Hollis believed that there needed to be more games starring women. So, GoldenEye stars a man, Perfect Dark stars a woman because we needed more women. I'm not going to
Yeah,
disagree.
got that right.
And Joanna Dark was influenced by a number of fictional heroines. There was Kim Kimberly from the interactive game Snowball, Agent X-27 from the 1930s film Dishonored, the star of La Femme Nikita, and of course, Dana Scully from the X-Files. So this is the late 90s, and at the time, the X-Files television show is an absolute culture phenomenon. I remember it came on Friday nights, and my butt was glued to the couch every Friday night to watch new episodes. So the team took its lead from the X-Files, and they wrote a story around a gray alien character and the premise of aliens and alien alliances being investigated. Of course, on top of using Agent Scully as an influence. So it's a very X Files esque basis for this project. And to flesh out the rest of their science fiction story, the team borrowed from some of their other favorite science fiction sources. They pulled from Ghost in the Shell, phenomenal. They pulled from Blade Runner, they pulled from Judge Dredd, and they pulled from other writing of K. Dick, who's a, if you don't know, very prominent science fiction writer, Blade Runner, How to Electric Sheep Sleep. I got that title butchered, but if you know, you know.
Much like sheep.
Yes. So as the team began to work through everything, with these ideas in mind, there were a number of working titles for the project that they threw around. There was Covert Ops. They called it Alien Intelligence at one point, but they kept throwing things out because nothing seemed to fit. And eventually they settled on Perfect Dark, which they utilized the word dark to associate the title with the game's focus on killing. Also, when it's converted into, they also kind of liked it because the name um, Perfect Dark kind of play like in Japanese. It basically like the it's bad grammar. Like the Japanese phrase of Perfect Dark would be bad grammar, and Hallis had a affection for the way Japanese developers used English words in their products, which was mostly wrong. And so he kind of liked the play. Perfect Dark as an English phrase is fantastic and kind of a perfect like title for the game, but in Japanese it wasn't, and he kind of liked that dichotomy, so to speak. So there's even a double dash symbol in the game's logo, and those are inspired by Japanese kanjis. Like it's inspired all the way around by it, basically. Being different from GoldenEye also meant, as I said, building upon its framework to improve on things. So the team at Rare took its engine, stripped it down to the basics, left about, it's said to be about 30% of the GoldenEye engine left, and then began to be rebuild it with a number of improvements. They added support for bigger environments and better textures, and that also meant that eventually the team is going to use up all the memory that's built into the console. So eventually, this game, when it's released, it's one of the games that has to use the N64 expansion pack. That expansion pack essentially doubles the memory that's available to the N64 from 4 megs to 8 megs. And so you have to have the expansion pack to play the majority of the game. The campaign can't be played without it, and most of the multiplayer can't be played without it. With that being said, you can play some of the deathmatch multiplayer. It says in the instruction book that about 35% of the game is still playable on the 4 megs of memory. So if you know, you know, right?
Yeah, but if you don't, you really don't.
Yeah, for real. You'd load the game and not understand what's going on. I don't know how it worked when you tried to play something that couldn't go in memory. I don't know if you got an error message or if it doesn't know the memory pack. If like if the memory pack's just there, it says no. I don't really know how any of that works. So they added real time lighting effects. That was something that the team really wanted as an upgrade over GoldenEye. This allowed the addition of gameplay, such as lights can be shot out to create darkened areas, which you can then sneak through. Gunfire and explosions illuminated the rooms, so if you shot, people knew where you were from the flash or could see you based on flashes. And you could also use infrared, you could also use night vision goggles. Those were gadgets that were added that weren't available in GoldenEye, that were added to this thanks to the real time lighting effects. Even with all of this, the team also wanted to give Joanna a flashlight, but believe it or not, they couldn't make it work with the technical limitations of the N64. This game technologically pushes the Nintendo 64 in ways most other games don't. It is one of the most technologically sophisticated games on the platform, period.
Damn.
And there are other ways in which the team built upon the GoldenEye engine. They added shattering glass effects, so you could shoot out windows or shoot bottles to alert people. They added death cries. They added gore effects, such as blood spatter on the walls when you would shoot enemies. And speaking of enemies, the team spent a lot of time upgrading the artificial intelligence for Perfect Dark. Like GoldenEye, Perfect Dark has an extensive multiplayer mode. There was no GoldenEye is one of the best multiplayer games on the N64, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And there was no way that this team was going to make a quote unquote spiritual successor, because that's the way the world seen this game. There was no way they were going to make a spiritual successor to GoldenEye without a multiplayer mode. But they knew they had to do it better. So, computer controlled bots. So now you can play deathmatch without needing any friends. Congratulations, Rob.
Yay! Perfect for those of us that don't like people.
Perfect indeed. And then throughout the campaign, the AI was upgraded, so now opponents would work as a team. One would draw secondary fire to distract you, while the other one snuck up on you, or they could pull secondary weapons when they were disarmed. So
Hmm.
a lot of upgrades. A lot of upgrades. This to the team. This was a bigger, better version of GoldenEye. And with that being said, there are definitely ways in which the team stayed on course with GoldenEye. They knew that going in, they still wanted the game to be a spy shooter, just set in a different universe, because that's what they liked about the GoldenEye process. And the team at the time, this is like 98 roughly, right? Because GoldenEye was 97. 98 would have been Metal Gear Solid. And Metal Gear Solid took the freaking world by storm, right? And so everyone was in love with Metal Gear Solid. And you can't possibly make another stealth game without at least acknowledging Metal Gear Solid or building off of Metal Gear Solid. And so that helped influence their stealth mechanics and also inspired them to add gadgets like there's a data uplink device and a thing called the Cam Spy, which is obviously a camera. And so, yeah, there was, you know, perfect timing to make a stealth game when the world was in love with the stealth game, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
All in all, Perfect Dark took roughly about 3 years to develop. The team grew during the time. Its original director, Martin Hollis, who also developed GoldenEye, left about halfway through development. He had a 4-year contract with Rare, and at the end of the 4 years, which was the middle of this process, he just decided that he wanted to move on. He has said in hindsight that he kind of regrets not seeing the project through. One of the other programmers on the project, a man by the name of Mark Edmonds, was promoted to director after Hollis left because it said he now had the most knowledge out of everyone left on the team. I guess that's a good enough reason to be the director.
Yeah, I would say so.
The team did end up on having to cut some features as they got near the end. They had actually developed a feature that would allow players to place a photograph of their choice onto the face of a multiplayer character. So this game worked in tandem with the Game Boy. Actually, the Game Boy, there was a Game Boy version of this game, and they talked to one another. You could actually unlock cheat codes for this version by playing the Game Boy version. But you could also the plan was to use the Game Boy camera to take a photo, and then using the Nintendo 64's transfer pack, you could transfer over to the N64 and pop it on the character model for multiplayer mode.
That's pretty cool.
Yes. But, and we talked about this last week with E3, this time period, in the middle of this game's development, the Columbine High School Massacre happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so censorship laws were being explored as a result. Violence was a topic in every conversation. And frankly, there were just concerns. At the time, they said we canned it because of technical limitations. But it came out later that the real reason was because they were concerned about the consequences of putting anyone's face on a character that's made to be murdered, right? Because that's what multiplayer is. It's deathmatch.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
and
could
they,
see the concern.
yeah, they didn't like the optics in the wake of Columbine. It's kind of funny how that's progressed over the years, right? Because now, like, we use like real person models is a real thing in games. Like, we love that, you know?
Yeah, times have changed.
Yeah. So the world first saw Perfect Dark at E3 1998, and the hype train started. A year later, we got a more complete picture at E3 1999, and then we saw it again at Nintendo Space World in August of 1999. So Nintendo fans were given plenty of fan service around what they believed to be the spiritual successor to one of the most popular multiplayer games of that generation. which is GoldenEye. So the hype train was real. People were on it. We were all excited for it. And Perfect Dark was finally released and finished on May 22nd, 2000. Rob, so after years of development, tons of ambition, and a massive amount of hype, Perfect Dark finally launched on May 22nd, 2000, bringing with it the spiritual successor to GoldenEye that Rare fans are waiting for. It was bold, it was high tech, and it pushed the N64 to its limits.
You know, Dave, it's kind of like starting your own podcast. Tons of ideas, a little bit of technical tinkering, and if you do it right, a whole lot of fun.
That's fair, but unlike developing for the N64, you don't need to fight with memory packs or figure out how to make a flashlight work. Because in our case, we use Zencaster, and Zencaster makes podcasting easy.
Zencaster's all in one platform lets you record high quality audio and video right from your browser. No fancy gear, no confusing setup. Just hit record and start recording.
And their post production tools, they'll do for your podcast what Rare's lighting engine did for Perfect Dark. They clean up background noise, balance your audio, and smooth out all those awkward pauses automatically. They'll basically make you look good.
Plus, once your episode is ready, Zencaster makes it simple to publish to all the big podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
So if you got a voice and a story to share, whether it's about gaming, gadgets, or gray aliens, head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan.
Don't let your creativity get trapped in the shadows. Let Zencaster light the way.
Unlike Joanna Dark, you can have a working flashlight. Start your podcasting journey with Zencaster today.
And with that, let's talk more about the Perfect Dark series.
So, like I said, Perfect Dark was first released in North America on the 22nd of May 2000, amid a little bit of controversy nonetheless. Because of its violence and language, it was given a mature rating. And as we know, as we've talked about time and time again, once upon a time, Nintendo had a bit of a reputation as a family friendly company. So, of course, there were some loud voices that didn't like that and let the world know. But to be fair, this is kind of the time in which they were transitioning more away from that. Not nearly as much as they did, say, a decade later, but there were definitely other multiplayer games that have been on these platforms. It wasn't the first one. So it wasn't the most popular game. The month it came out in May of 2000, it was like the second best selling game. But as we went into Christmas, it was like the 24th best selling game of the year. It wasn't like, top of everything. It was top 25, to be fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
It eventually sold 3.2 million copies. So I guess eventually it did all right for itself.
I mean, I would say that's pretty fair. That's a pretty good amount.
Yeah. Shortly after the release of Perfect Dark, Rare had started planning out a sequel. It was going to tentatively be called Velvet Dark. And that was based on one of the multiplayer characters, which was Joanna's alleged sister, who was named Velvet. That project, for whatever reason, never moved past pre production and was canceled before it got anywhere. And then the team, amongst other projects, kind of started to work on a different Perfect Dark project. This was going to be a GameCube title, and it was an N64 and there was a GameCube title, and it was going to be called Perfect Dark Zero. It was a sequel, but a prequel, because it ended up being a prequel. A few years later, in 2002, Microsoft purchases Rare. They pony up, like we had said, Nintendo had 49%, and eventually Xbox gets the money and they purchase 51% of Rare. So they own the studio now. That was one of their first big acquisitions when they started to push this whole live. So Microsoft has them transfer the project from the GameCube to the Xbox, duh, right? And The team has to repurpose the game's multiplayer mode for the Xbox Live service. This is the original Xbox. But the version of the game they had at the time pushed the Xbox to the limits. And Microsoft was in the not really planning, prototype phase of its new upcoming console, which was the Xbox 360. So the decision was made there at that point, seeing how it pushed the limits of the original Xbox, to move the game to the 360 platform. And the company said, move it to the 360. Xbox Live is getting a boost. We want you to take this multiplayer mode, do something special with it. So, make it kick butt. And we're going to make this one of our launch titles. In order to become one of the launch titles for the Xbox 360, they end up having to cancel a bunch of features that they had planned. For instance, that kick butt multiplayer mode was originally designed with 50 players at once,
Oh,
but that
wow.
had to be nixed down to 32 players in order to make it work stably on time. They were also going to have a spectator mode, so to speak, a replay mode where the company that's the bad guy in the game is called Datadyne, and it was going to be called Datadyne TV, and you would be able to save your replays and upload them on like a network to like the Xbox Live network to share with people. They had to nix that in time, so there were all these features that they were going to do for Perfect Dark Zero that they just couldn't manage because they were on a crunch timeline. They were on an incredibly crunch timeline, it's said, but they made it. And Perfect Dark Zero was released with the Xbox 360 as a launch title in November of 2005. Fans and critics of Perfect Dark had very mixed opinions about the game. To be fair, it was a good game. I think its Metacritic score is like an 81 or 82 out of 100. Not a shabby score.
Damn, not at all.
It got decent scores, but the problem is it made the leap from GameCube to Xbox 360. That's a generational leap and a half, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And the hype kept building as it did this. And so by the time it finally released, fans just expected more. That's the people that knock it, the critics that knock it. That is the consensus. We just expected more from this development cycle and this generational leap. It's too close to what it was and not what it should be. But it released, fans enjoyed it, it sold. It still exists to this day. In 2015, Perfect Dark Zero was made backwards compatible for the Xbox One. And in 2019, it became an Xbox One enhanced game, which meant it has higher resolutions and higher frame rates, which means it can still be played on the Xbox Series S or X with the higher resolution and higher frame rates. So it's 2025. You can still play Perfect Dark Zero. It's also found as part of the Rare Replay edition. Rare Replay contains not only Perfect Dark Zero, but a remastered version of the original Perfect Dark that was originally released on the Xbox Live Arcade in 2010. So if you ever find the Rare Replay like physical edition, it has both Perfect Darks on it. So if you've never played the series, Rob, and you'd like to, Rare Replay.
Rare replay.
Rare Replay. As for where we stand now with the series, back in 2020, when we were all locked in place at the Game Awards, Microsoft announced that they were rebooting the series and working on a new Perfect Dark title. It's got the title Perfect Dark. It's a reboot. It's being developed by a studio called The Initiative, which is made up of some members of the team that worked on the modern Tomb Raider reboot, which was phenomenal, by the way. So fans are really excited to see what they'll do with the Perfect Dark franchise. That team is Crystal Dynamics, and actually, over time, there's been a lot of changes to the team, and now the Initiative and Crystal Dynamics are working on this together. So cool. We have unfortunately seen a lot of changes to the Initiative studio. The people who were in charge of this game have come and gone a couple times. I think we're on our third or fourth like production manager, director of the title now. And that's some concern 5 years later. But with that being said, about a year ago, We did see, I don't remember if it was the Game Awards or if it was Xbox Direct or what have you. We did see gameplay of this game in June of 2024. So we know that it's being worked on. Haven't heard much about it then. So hopefully they're chugging along and we will get a new title at some point.
Right on.
But yeah, the I don't really know if Perfect Dark is for you. It's not for me. I don't like the stealth, and I don't think the I don't think it's that great as a run and shoot type game personally. So I've never been a huge fan of the Perfect Dark series. I've played both of them. To be fair, they've just neither one of them has grabbed me. The first one really didn't, and I tried the second one to be like, well, maybe this one will get me, and then it didn't, and I just went, I guess this isn't for me, you know.
Yeah. Sometimes that's how it be.
So, um, and I can't, knowing what I know about you and your game interests, I don't know if this is for you. But if you like stealth, if you like spy stuff, especially if you like stealth, you should play this. You should play this. If you like sci-fi, you should also play this. So,
Go give it a try, folks.
all right. Well, this is another part of Rare's history that we hadn't talked about before. We have, of course, talked about other parts of Rare's history, like GoldenEye. Did a whole episode on that. Like, what was the other one we did? GoldenEye, Donkey
Banjo?
Kong Country.
Oh.
Also did an episode there. So lots of other opportunities to talk about the details of other specific parts of Rare's history. Of course, if you want to check out those old episodes, you can do so by going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
Well, you can find a calendar of our future episode topics, see what we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks and months. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about episode topics or video game related topics. You can find links to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob underscore O underscore Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, ladies and gentlemen, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. We've done on games, consoles, technologies. We did on a museum once. Just we find fun topics that are somehow relevant to the publication date of this podcast, and we roll with it. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. The best part about doing this week after week is we sit down to do research on a new topic, and we always learn new things. We always learn new things, and it excites us because then we get to teach you new things. It's a fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching, and in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways in celebration. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think it's pretty damn revolutionary of an idea that they were looking at using the Game Boy camera to put pictures of your friends or self into the game for multiplayer. It's not really something I think about when I think back on the Game Boy era or N6 or the early 64 or anything. It's just kind of seems like a huge thing that if obviously Columbine hadn't happened would have been might have been a huge change. Like we could have games now where it's commonplace to just scan our face and have us be the character in the game. And that's kind of crazy, you know? I mean, it's sad that video game changed so much. It's tragic what happened during that event. But it just makes you wonder that had that not happened and they actually put that camera, they instituted that into the multiplayer and everything, like what how would it be today?
It's really interesting to think about how what's going on in the world has what's going on in the world has defined video games, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is an example in which literally, a feature had to be cut because of what was going on in the world. As you know, I've been playing Clear Obscure, and Clear Obscure is
What
about.
you? No way.
Oh, I know, right? Clear Obscure is basically about like an an ending of the world, right? You're sending you're sending an expedition to try to break the cycle that always results in the end of the world. It's literally like society ending stuff. And someone I saw a post online the other day where someone was like, "It's funny how sometimes gaming reflects real life."
Yeah, art imitates life.
It does. It does. Well, and one of the other really popular games that I have queued up, downloaded to play is Blueprints, and Blueprints is about rising up against a tyrannical government. So, hello.
Nice.
Anyway, a lot of great things. Since I sold it from you, I will take the Dave, what did you learn today?
Yeah, Dave, what did you learn today?
I liked learning about how this game was basically a teardown and rebuild of GoldenEye. And I know I didn't really talk much about it, but it's kind of like a here's the things we want to do better with GoldenEye. I mean, there can't be any other way to look at it, right? Because they took the same engine, tore it down, and rebuilt it with these things improved. No doubt they probably want to do that the first time around, right? This is what we learned the first time around, and we want to do better now. So I kind of like the notion that this is the bigger, better, improved version of GoldenEye in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. It is pretty neat to think of that.
All right, Rob. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap it up and look forward to next week. So, before I do that, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us to have you along each week as we dive into all of these crazy episode topics and learn new and exciting things about the games and the studios that made them. So thank you.
Yes, indeed. As we emerge from the shadows of Perfect Dark, we're reminded of how Rare's masterpiece redefined the first person shooter genre on consoles with its futuristic intrigue and innovative mechanics. The lighting features that it played with were something no one had seen at the time, and that became a staple of the industry moving forward. Joanna's Dark Journey basically showed us the potential of blending storytelling with cutting edge gameplay and technology. So, whether you're decoding conspiracies or sharpening your skills, always remember this thrill of one of gaming's stealthiest adventures. Next week, though, we're swapping the high tech espionage of Perfect Dark for the intense strategic battlegrounds of Defense of the Agents, also known as Dota. Born as a humble Warcraft 3 mod, Dota didn't just redefine teamwork and strategy in gaming, it sparked the MOBA revolution, paving the way for global esports phenomena like League of Legends and Dota 2. Join us as we explore the origins of this fan made masterpiece and its transformation into a genre that dominates competitive gaming on next week's strategic trip down memory card lane. What do you think?
Doo-ba-doom, ba-ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-doo, up, doo, up, doo, ah.